As mentioned before, this is just the introduction project, therefore I'll just guide you through the core steps required for this project. We'll dive into everything you see right here and a lot more in a lot of detail throughout the course. Therefore, a very quick intro on what you can see right here. In the center part, you have the information that we saw on the website now imported into Power BI Desktop. In the left part, you see our so-called queries, so our connections to the source files. Here we have one connection to the website. In the right part, you have the so-called applied steps. This will present and store all changes applied to our data here. These 3 steps were automatically applied by Power BI Desktop, by the way. And up here, you see we have different ribbons we can click through, and each ribbon comes with different options mainly related to the information here in the center of our screen. So what should we do with this information now? Well, the goal is to have a cleaned and prepared data set we can use to then create our visual. And for that, we first should work on the column names, because here you can select the individual columns, and you see we have column 1, column 2, and so on. Not the best column names at this stage, especially as row number 2. This one here has country, subject descriptor, units, and so on. So it already contains our correct column names. Now we could manually rename these columns here. This would be possible, but a better way would be to delete this first column here. And with that, our row 2 would become our new row 1. And then we could turn this first row into our column names, into our so-called header. This means we have 2 steps we should do right here. We should delete this existing first row, and then we should turn our new first row, this one here, into the column names. To do so, we go to the home ribbon up here, and there you have this reduce rows area. If you click on to remove rows, you see we have plenty of options. In our case, the first one is the required option, remove top rows. Let's select this. And now we have to specify how many rows starting from the top we want to remove. Well, in our case, we want to remove row 1. Therefore, we should simply enter 1 right here, press OK, and the first row is immediately gone, also indicated by the removed top row step here in the right part in our applied steps column. So whenever you accidentally do a wrong step here, you can simply undo this by clicking onto this X symbol left to that applied step, just as a side note. With the first step done, we now need to turn this row into our column names. To do so, we can again go to the home ribbon, now go to the right part of the screen here, and click on to use first row as headers, like this. And now we have the correct column names, country, subject descriptor, units, and so on. This was quite easy, wasn't it? Now, as we're talking about columns here at the moment, we should check if we need all these different columns that we have in our data. You can select the columns with the mouse, as I did it right here, or navigate through the different columns with the left and right arrow key on your keyboard. So we could say that the country, yeah, this is a column we need. The subject descriptor showing you that we have the GDP here, this is also fine. But the units, for example, I don't think we need that column. Therefore, we can now either go again to our home ribbon, this one, and go to remove columns, right? And therefore remove this existing column. Or alternatively, we can right click onto that column and press remove up here. Let's go with this approach now to remove the column. The scale can be kept, this is fine. Here we have an empty column, so again the same approach, right click and remove. And the remaining columns showing our GDP data, I think these are all right. Let's see if we have any additional unrequired column. Yes, the last one here. So one last time, right click and remove. And with that, we already improved our columns a lot. However, I'm still not happy with the result, because now we should work on the structure of our data. Because if you have a look at the first columns, we have the country, we have the scale, and then we have all these different years. Now, wouldn't it be more in line with our current structure if we would have country, then back here maybe a column named year, and then one column named GDP? Because with that, each individual topic would be covered in a separate column, and the corresponding values would be stored inside that column. I think this would be a good idea. And to do that, we simply can select the 2014 column. Now scroll to the right, press and hold the Shift button on our keyboard, and select the 2021 column. Now all columns should be selected. And what I want to do now is I want to turn these individual columns into two new columns, with one column being the year and the corresponding year values we can see here as the column names, and with the second column containing all the corresponding GDP data. So all this information that is now stored in separate columns should be stored in this individual column then. Sounds a bit complex at this stage, but it's a really helpful feature, so let's do it and then take a closer look at it again. To apply this transformation, we should now not go to the Home ribbon, but to the Transform ribbon here. And here we can now go to Unpivot Columns. And this Unpivot option will exactly do what I was just explaining. So if we select this, you see that we now have two columns only. All the other columns are gone, or are not gone actually, are structured or organized differently. Now, this attribute column here contains all the annual data, so all the data for the different years, and the value column contains the GDP data. This means we reduced the amount of columns, but of course increased the row count, because now all the different years are stored in a different row. Before, these were stored in different columns. With that, we achieved a big step already. What we should do now is we should maybe rename this column. So we can do this with a simple double click and naming it year, pressing enter. Alternatively, we can also right click here and go down to rename and name it GDP, also hitting enter. So this looks already very good. We are almost done with our data preparation here. There are just two important steps missing. One step is to change the data format, because at the moment, all our information is stored as text. You can see this indicated by this ABC symbol here. And if you click onto that, you see that we can change the data format like this. But before we do that, and that's very important also for the rest of the course, we should make sure that if we want to change the data format from a text that we have right here to a number, we should make sure that the information stored here can be converted to a different format. Because here the GDP should not be stored as text, it should be stored as a number actually. Therefore, we should ensure that it contains only data which can be formatted as a number. To do that, we can simply click onto this arrow next to the column name. And here we have the filter menu. The filter menu allows you to change the order the information is displayed, and it allows you to scroll through the data to see if you have any unwanted values. If you scroll down right here, for example, you can see that we have an NA value down there. And this NA value can't be formatted as a number, therefore this would cause errors. So this means if we now unselect NA, it will be excluded from our data. And this will then allow us to format the data correctly. So let's press OK here. And now we can change the data format. And to do that, I showed you that already, we can simply click onto the symbol and now change the GDP to a decimal number like this. And the same thing can be done for the year. So let's click right here. We could actually format it as a date, but for the purpose of the introduction project, we can simply format it as whole number, totally sufficient at this point. And with that, we did our first data preparation. As you can see, these were lots of steps actually for an introduction project, but it shows you how powerful Power BI Desktop is. What we have to do now is we have to leave our query editor and load this information into our so-called data model. This means we should make sure that we get the information from that editor into this part of Power BI Desktop, you could say. To do that, we go to File and now press Close and Apply right here, like this. If you do so, you see the query editor is closing and the query changes are now applied and the data is loaded into our data model. And in this data model, we will now finally create our visuals.